Thanks for listening. If you like the candid discussion and are seeking the truth behind the mainstream narrative, then please subscribe and share. Not only am I grateful, but those who seek the truth and wish to empower themselves and their family's health, freedoms, and future will also be grateful. Hey everybody, I'm here today with Morley Robbins, and we are having some technical difficulties, but it's worth the conversation. We're going to work through this. So right when I start to speak, there's a little bit of reverberation, but then it seems to go away after a little bit, and then it's only when I start. So we're going to talk about a couple of things that may seem a little controversial, but I love the way Morley looks at research to not be afraid to look at it differently and to also formulate his own opinions as a result of what's out there. So there's this general narrative, there's this mainstream narrative and understanding that vitamin D, specifically 25-hydroxy vitamin D3, many of us are deficient in, and most of us are deficient in vitamin D unless we're supplementing. So the questions I have for Morley today is, number one, Morley, all we hear about is the good of vitamin D. There's really no discussion about any, what if you have too much vitamin D3? I'm going to ask the question, why is it that everyone seems to be low in vitamin D3 in your opinion?
Yeah, and I will answer your question in due course, but let me interject some research that I found this morning that I think is very, very important. So people know that I research every morning, 7 days a week, 365, and I get a kick out of it. I never know where I'm going to go. And I'm always looking for new nuances around copper and iron and magnesium, because there's just no end of insights that you can get. So in the course of 11 years, I've probably read now maybe close to 8,000 articles. And that's probably more than 8,000 doctors, because doctors don't read after they get out of school.
It's hard.
It's hard. And you're tired. It's hard and you're tired. So I'm always looking for research that really gives a clinical bent to copper deficiency. And it's very rare to find. And I'm studying another vitamin, which maybe we'll talk about in a future seance, but vitamin C is maybe the second biggest lie after vitamin D. So we'll slay the vitamin dragon today. But before we do that, because I was researching vitamin C, it got me to ask different types of questions, and I typically ask. And I came across this article. Make sure people can see it. And it's by Dr. Attarelli and his colleagues in Switzerland.
Copper deficiency, manifestations, and treatment.
Right. It's from 2019. So I know it's really old. I'm so sorry. But this is a very important article because what they talk about, and Wade, what I'll do is I'll send you the link for this article, and then I'll send you the link for a second article that's from the exact same year by Dr. Vasilyev.
1 second. Zoom in. Looking for a partner, ceruloplasmin in protein interactions.
This is the mother lode of information about copper. But what's important is that together they make a mockery of conventional medicine. And the reason why the first one is so important is because what they're introducing the reader to is that it appears, based on their experience as 4 hospital-based clinicians in Switzerland, that there's a very clear and direct relationship between copper deficiency. This is a picture of copper deficiency, a desert. When when a researcher says copper deficiency, no evidence of copper in the tissue, between copper deficiency and hematological problems, best described as anemia, neurological problems, best described as neurodegeneration, which is a crisis on the planet, cardiovascular problems, which would be the number one cause of death on the planet, cutaneous tissue problems, that would be the largest organ on the body called skin, immune system disorders, and finally, skeletal system disorders. So we're just identifying 6 different classes of diseases that account for about 95% of the problems that people have, all because of a lack of copper. Now, why do I get so passionate about copper? Because it's why we're here. It's why we're able to make energy. It's why Dr. Wade and I can have these very lofty conversations on a very fancy technology, because it takes a lot of IQ to do that. And what's behind the IQ? A lot of energy. And we live on a planet with oxygen. And if you can't turn oxygen into water, they can't make any energy. It's that basic. And the mineral that makes all this possible.
You can't make, you just froze up. If you can't make copper into
energy,
water.
If you can't turn oxygen into water, you can't release energy in the mitochondria. Most basic, most important chemical reaction on planet Earth. Oxygen needs to become water. And
not hydroxyl.
Not the hydroxyl group, not hydrogen peroxide, not superoxide. There's so many different forms of oxidants, but if we can't make water, we're screwed. And copper is the only mineral on planet Earth that can not only regulate oxygen, it regulates iron. And what do iron and oxygen do? They make rust. They make rust outside the body, and they make rust inside the body. And we knew about the rust outside the body, rusty nails, rusty pipes, rusty cars. We know what rust is like, right? We didn't know that the same rusting process was occurring inside our body. So having copper be available to work its magic on a planet that's dominated by iron and oxygen is really important. And so what we want to do is we want to make as much energy as possible. And the reason why I love this article so much, let me switch platforms here real quick. I'm multitasking today.
You're doing great.
Let me find the quotation. This is one of the paragraphs in this article by Dr. Alteretti and colleagues. He's talking about manifestations of copper deficiency. And all of this, everything I'm covering, is in prelude to your critical question of what's going on with vitamin D. I'm going to get there, trust me. It's playing in the back of my head. Mm-hmm. Copper deficiency, leads to unspecific presentations, just as I said, with hematologic, neurologic, immunologic, dermatologic, cardiovascular, and skeletal anomalies, which are detailed below. And I quote, "Fatigue is one of the non-specific presentations of copper deficiency in the general population, as it generates anemia, a global cause of fatigue. Low copper levels, in turn, reduce iron absorption, which is the most frequent cause of fatigue." And if I had a microphone, I would be dropping it to the stage floor right now, because that's it. That's the whole argument, is before you get any clinical condition, there's energy deficiency that precedes it. And why do you have energy deficiency? Because you don't have enough bioavailable copper to turn oxygen into water. So this process of making energy is really important, which means that having bioavailable copper is really important. And I don't like people to take anything that's going to disrupt the bioavailability of their copper.
Such as an antibiotic.
An antibiotic, ascorbic acid, citrate, high fructose corn syrup, ibuprofen, and we could go on and on. Hormone replacement therapy. I know people freak out when I say that, but it's very disruptive to normal physiology. Iron supplements, boom, explosively destructive. And vitamin D supplements. What? What did you say? That vitamin D that I've been sucking down and drowning in is disrupting my copper status? How could that be? And so the question that you asked was, what's really behind this vitamin D deficiency? Well, it's a completely fabricated condition to start with. Because in 2010, the level of vitamin D in storage, again, we've got a storage form and an active form. Just as we do with all hormones, every hormone has a storage form and an active form. It's not a vitamin, folks. It's a full-fledged, it's officially called a corticosteroid hormone, which means it's really powerful. And doctors only measure the storage form and ignore the active form. It's the only hormone where doctors are not measuring both. It's the only hormone, what's next to melatonin, I believe that hormone D is the only hormone you can buy over the counter. All the others are by prescription only. That's a curious thing. Gee, why would they do that? And in 2010, the level of storage hormone that was considered okay, the level was 12. And then along comes this guy named Michael Hollick, who's a PhD MD at Boston University, who made his fame studying the vitamin D molecule, and I think he may have been one of the discoverers of the active form. And suddenly what was considered an acceptable level went from 12 to 30, so more than doubling the amount. And then the range went from 30 to 100, which is obscene amounts of storage D. And silence on the active side. And the really gifted endocrinologists all know that there needs to be a balance between active and storage. And when it comes to hormone D, there should be 1.5 times the amount of active. The number for active should be 1.5 times the number for storage. And they're measured in different units, so that's why I'm saying the number. So that people have been misled around what is considered an acceptable level. We went from 12 to 30. A lot of practitioners like to get it up closer to 80, which is outrageous. And what people don't know is about the research by Mohammed Amer, who's a very talented research physician at Johns Hopkins. And a lot of people may know that I'm from Baltimore, and my nickname is Baltimorely. So I really worship at the altar of Hopkins because I think they're really smart people down there. And Mohammed Amer in 2013 came out with a very important study that said, looking at all-cause mortality versus storage D level, there's no clinical benefit to having storage D above 21. So we went from 12 to 21. We turned the numbers around, but it's not 80. And there's a very robust study that he did to compare all the different causes of disease and death. and said there's no benefit to being above 21, which means that the active should really be no higher than 40. 35 to 40 would be considered a really robust active level. I've had clients that have been well over 100.
Me too.
And what people don't know is that the active form of the hormone is an acute microbial peptide. Well, what does that mean? It's part of the backup plan to kill pathogens. And the storage form can become an active form, but what most people don't know is actually it can go 12 different ways. There's 12 different roads. When you start to ingest storage hormone through supplement, it can go 12 different ways. It's like coming into some circus in Rome, and you can go, wow, 12 different routes. And we have been trained, like circus bears, to believe that there's only one route. Storage becomes active and we're done.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the 12 routes is that the storage becomes sulfated. And Stephanie Seneff has done a beautiful job talking about the importance of sulfation of vitamin D and cholesterol. And what does sulfating it do? It makes it water soluble. It means that it can really move around the body a lot easier because it's no longer fat soluble, which is a big deal. And so one route is to become active. Another route is to become sulfated. Another route is to turn it off. It's called, instead of being 25 hydroxy, it becomes 24 hydroxy. And there's an enzyme that does that. And what I find fascinating is that the enzyme to activate, to turn the precursor into the storage form, you got to have magnesium. And what's amazing is in order to turn it off, you got to have magnesium. So that would imply that, so maybe magnesium is really important for regulating vitamin D status. Yeah, that's exactly right. So hold on to that thought. And so we've got this storage active thing going that nobody knows about. We've got this need to sulfate. Well, what do you have to do in order to sulfate it? You got to go outside where there's sunlight. Real important. If you don't have sunlight, you can't have sulfation, proper sulfation. Because those photons, those pesky little photons that's hard to get when you're in lockdown, are very important to the process of biochemistry. And so people don't know about that. And here's the most important thing that they don't know, is that our ancestors, by virtue of their diet, got plenty of vitamin D because it only had to be 12 back in the day. And everything changed in 2010 because Michael Hollick got a burr up his derriere. And so now people have been trained to be fearful of a, quote, low. Well, again, everything's high-low, right? So we're supposed to get out our ruler that we used in grade school.
A ruler, just go ahead. We lost you for a moment.
Okay. Yeah, the storm outside is pretty wild. But we're supposed to use this ruler and do a dipstick. Get it? Spell that with a D, right? Dipstick, get it? And it's either high or low. Right. Well, are we still in grade school? No. Most of the people probably listening to this at least went to high school. And what did we learn in high school? We learned algebra. We learned that there's variables. And so apparently all they learn in doctor school is dipstick measurement. And they don't learn about variables. And so when we're driving a car, we're very mindful of the fuel gauge that runs from empty to full actually runs from full to empty, doesn't it? It always seems to always empty out, doesn't it? And so if we are driving a lot and we notice that we have to keep filling up a lot, at some point we're going to say, wait a minute, maybe I should go back to high school, get out my algebra, and look up this miles per gallon. And then we've got variables. We have, what we're measuring then is fuel performance. How many miles am I getting per gallon of gas that I'm guzzling up? And if it's getting 30, 32, we're pretty happy. We're pretty excited about that. If it starts to get 12 to 15, we take it to the mechanic and say, what the hey? What's going on? And so doctors have not been taught, the public has not been taught, that vitamin D is a miles per gallon requirement. And what determines the amount of vitamin D is the amount of magnesium that's available in the liver to activate the precursor to become the storage hormone. And why might there not be enough magnesium? Because people are stress cadets. And the way the body is wired is as soon as we're confronted with stress, boom, we lose magnesium, which allows kinase enzymes to release phosphate to energize enzymes. We would be lost without these kinase enzymes. And so the cost of that stress, though, is called magnesium loss. Goes right into our urine, goes right into the urinal or the toilet, and we do it all day long. And that's why I coined the phrase magnesium burn rate is determining how much stress you've got in your life. And so, again, the doctors don't know about algebra. What I find really funny is all the guys and gals that I knew in college who got into medical school, and there were quite a few, they all got A in calculus. And calculus is a whole nother leap up from algebra, right? Calculus makes it's just a painful form of math to try to understand. So they got an A in calculus, and they're using dipsticks to measure variables like vitamin D, and it's really funny. I think it's absolutely a riot. So it's important for the public to understand that this is a algebraic issue, and so that if hormone D is low, that there are certain things you should be asking. Am I getting enough cholesterol in my diet? Because cholesterol is a precursor to this whole process. Am I getting enough cholesterol? Am I getting enough sunlight? Probably not, right? And do I have enough magnesium in my diet? And is there enough magnesium in my liver in order to allow the proper expression of the storage D? And then what we've got to do is recalibrate what is expected. We don't need to be at 80, we need to be at 21. And when I first came on the scene with Facebook and started to challenge the status quo of that whole paradigm and started pushing back, I challenged people. I said, look, stop taking it, start taking magnesium, start lowering your stress, spend a little more time outside and see what happens. And they were shocked. And their vitamin D came right into alignment with where it's supposed to be. Not just the storage, but the active. Mm-hmm. But it flies in the face of the mainstream medical narrative that our immune system absolutely runs on the backbone of storage D. And that's a bold-faced lie. And anyone who wants to really do a deeper dive into all of this stuff, I would encourage them to go to the Facebook group run by Jim Stevenson Jr. He'd be a great person for you to talk with, Wade. He's brilliant. He's actually a PhD engineer, but he's probably one of the foremost authorities on vitamin D for a variety of reasons. But the name of his group on Facebook is called the SECO, SECO, SECO Steroid Hormone D Group. And he has hundreds and hundreds of articles outlining why it's not just a bad idea, it's dangerous. How's that spelled? Capital D, dangerous to take hormone D. And he and I have had several conversations more recently because we see this alarming distortion of reality around vitamin D. And so if you really want to do the deep dive, that's where you want to hang out, is on that site. But what's important to understand is that the process, there are 8 enzymes needed to regulate vitamin D in the human body. 8 of them require magnesium. And so another important point is that people have been led to believe that vitamin D runs the immune system, and that's not true. That's just absolutely not true.
I would concur with that, for sure.
Vitamin A and vitamin D are very important for the immune system, and they're like frickin' frack, A and D. And you gotta have both. And the best source of both is called cod liver oil, or the best source of both would be beef liver. But the reason why vitamin A is so important is that all of the attributes that Michael Hollick, John Cannell, and people like that who love to beat their chest about the supremacy of vitamin D, what they're really talking about is the active form. And so in order to get to the active form, you've got to have magnesium in the kidney to take the storage D and turn it into the active D. And that doesn't always happen, again, but magnesium becomes important for a second time. But you need to be in the active state. It's got to be active hormone D, and it's got to be synced up with the vitamin D receptor, which is magnesium dependent, by the way. Ding, ding, ding. And that needs to be complexed with a nuclear receptor called RXR, which stands for retinoid X receptor. And there are about 16 different functions that the RXR makes available, like thyroid hormones working right, like liver hormones working right, like farnesene hormones working right. It goes on and on and on. And one of them happens to be the vitamin D receptor. So the VDR doesn't work without the RXR. And the only way you can get to RXR, is if you have retinol in your diet and you're able to conjugate the retinol and get it to what's called a retinoic acid. And retinoic acids are another class of hormones you've never heard about. And they are 9-cis, 11-cis, and that's CIS, not SIS, like your sister. It's 9-cis, 11-cis, 13-cis, and all trans retinoic acid. And those 4 hormones are blockbuster hormones in the body that run circles around vitamin D. It's really funny that we've been trained to believe in vitamin D, and we're now supposed to treat vitamin A as a toxin. Ooh, you're gonna get poisoned with all that retinol. Never telling us that the problem is the research about vitamin A toxicity is based on the synthetic form of retinol palmitate, and there's no copper. And so it's like a complete distortion of reality. And then it's like the headlines are, retinol becomes a poison and you're going to die eating it. It's like, do we need more fear in this world? Do we need more fear porn? I mean, it just doesn't stop. So the thing is, vitamin D receptor, RXR, that's the magic combination for the immune system. And nobody knows that. Okay, I'll stop.
All right, so what you're saying is that toxic form, there's a nasty feedback, a toxic form of retinoic. Retinol was the palmitate form of it. So it's not even, so in other words, it's a fractionated form of retinoic acid. Okay. Which would look like a toxin of the body because the body's not used to seeing in that form.
Well, it's a naturally occurring metabolite. It's called retinyl palmitate. It's called a retinol ester, and that's the storage form for retinol in the liver, which is okay. But do you think that the retinol that you get out of cod liver oil is the same as the retinol you're going to get out of a test tube? Probably not. And a lot of people think it is the same, and it's not. Chemically, they may look absolutely identical, but biologically, they are light years apart. And there is energy in that biological difference. And so the synthetic form is devoid of energy.
Left and right.
I know, I can't figure it out.
But left and right.
Yeah.
Look exactly the same. They're mirror images, but it doesn't mean they can both fit in the same catalyst.
Right. There you go. Thank you. Very, very good example. Yeah. So most of the proteins in our body are levo. They are left. They're left. And there's a reason why they're not roto. And God knows why they are unfolding to the left, and hopefully God knows why they're unfolding to the left. But a little known fact is that when you put protein in a microwave, the proteins go from being levo to roto. And then, so when levo becomes roto, what does the body do? It sees it as a toxin and attacks it because it doesn't know how to unfold it. And so it's like two people meeting and they both use their left hand to try to shake hands.
Can't do it.
Or one uses their right hand and one uses their left hand. It doesn't work. So the thing is, they're very subtle nuances to this understanding of what is vitamin D deficiency. Well, the scale, the reference range is flawed. It went from 12 to 30 to 100. No other metabolite has ever experienced that kind of distortion in its measurement. Then we've got the whole conjugation of vitamin D. It's based on cholesterol, and you got to have magnesium to deal with it. And what I find a very curious riddle is that we grew up in an era where fat and cholesterol was demonized. I mean, you're up in Wisconsin where it's Dairyland USA, and it was in the 50s. It was like one of the main producers of butter, and in fact, if you tried to bring margarine into the state of Wisconsin, you got arrested for it. And now, I bet when you go to the supermarket, you have a hard time finding butter in the supermarket. Maybe some Kerrygold, maybe some organic, but you don't find butter today the way you did 70 years ago. And so butter has been demonized, or fat's been demonized, cholesterol has been demonized. So here's the riddle. How did the nation with the highest cholesterol in the history of mankind, how did the nation with the highest cholesterol, which is a precursor to making storage D, how did it become the nation with the lowest vitamin D levels? And the first thing people say was, well, we're just not getting enough sunlight. No. We're not getting enough cholesterol. We're not getting enough magnesium. And we have way too much iron. And why am I getting enough copper? And we're not getting enough copper. And why am I playing the iron card? Because excess iron in the liver will burn up the magnesium that's needed to flip it into the storage form. And as soon as I see someone who has what is a really low storage D, which is in the teens, so somewhere between 12 and 19, when I see that, my first thought is they have iron overload in their liver, They don't have enough magnesium to spit at, and I'm wondering what they're really eating in the way of fat and cholesterol.
So we lost you right when we were talking about oxidation. When you talked about iron in the liver.
So when I'm working with someone who has a true clinically low vitamin D, somewhere between 12 and 19, the very first thing I think about is, do they have excess iron in their liver? Because excess iron will burn up the magnesium that's needed to activate the enzymes. And then I'm wondering, what is their diet like? What are they eating in the way of cholesterol? That's an essential precursor to making storage D, which then becomes active D.
So they're measuring, this feedback is nasty.
Sorry.
They're measuring storage D, but if you're excessive iron, you're burning up the magnesium, so you can't convert your storage to the active form, but they're finding low levels of storage because that's all they're measuring.
Well, they're finding what they report as low, but again, the Michael Holick reference range starts at 30.
And goes up.
The Mohammed Amer is at 21, and 11 years ago it used to be 12. People don't know the games that are being played with statistics. We have a little bit now that we've gotten a year of PCR testing under our belt. We know the games that they can play, but people don't realize the manipulation of data that's driving people to take a supplement. And again, so then why, beyond all that we've just talked about, why do I go out of my way to talk about this? Because when you take vitamin D supplements, we've known since 1962 by the stellar research of John Ferris, a professor of medicine at a small medical school in Connecticut called Yale, that vitamin D supplements cause renal potassium wasting. Well, why is that important? Because when you have insufficient potassium in your cells, you're going to be more likely to be able to absorb iron. And excess iron in your cells is not your friend. People don't know that. Then in 1999, some very important research was done to reveal that, if you're taking vitamin D supplements, it's going to increase your iron absorption in the kidney, and it's going to deplete your energy production in the kidney. Well, that's not good. That's not good at all. And then we get the Stephanie Seneff research that we've got to have sunlight to sulfate it. People don't realize that the way the biochemistry works, they're not thinking about that. Then the one study that everyone loves to talk about is Dr. Lappy at Tufts University School of Nutrition. Wonderful program there. And what Dr. Lappy identified in 2007, is that, if you take vitamin D, you won't get cancer. That's the party line. Get your vitamin D and you're not going to have cancer. And there are a lot of people who really believe that. Well, Dr. Lappy did something unheard of. She updated her study a decade later. 2017, Lappe, Judith N. Lappy, I believe is her name.
Okay.
And what did they discover? Vitamin D does not in any way prevent cancer. I would argue, in fact, it accelerates it, but we don't have time to talk about that today. But the real reason why I'm so passionate about this is that when people are sucking down vitamin D supplements, trying to drown their body in D because some pundit on Facebook or some social media said, it's going to stop all your disease process. it blocks the absorption of retinol. Because the receptor for the fat-soluble vitamins can take A or D, but can't take both A and D. And so what's the ratio of A to D in cod liver oil? Anywhere from 10 to 20 to 1. It's an enormous amount of retinol in the liver in these fish that are allowed to swim freely in the ocean. But the fish that are under lockdown are supposed to be all D and no A. And so when you're all D and no A, you cannot make retinoid X receptor. You cannot get to the point of having active D. And when you can't conjugate retinol, when you can't properly metabolize retinol, you cannot load copper into its proper enzymes to secure and ensure our metabolic integrity. We can't process the other hormones, the catecholamines they're called, cortisol and adrenaline, very, very important chemicals in our body. We can't properly metabolize neuropeptides, little pesky things like dopamine and serotonin. We can't make melatonin. So when you take melanin and serotonin, you get melatonin. It's really important. It's one of the master antioxidants in the body. No can do if you don't have bioavailable copper. If we don't have bioavailable copper, we can't make energy. If we don't have bioavailable copper, we can't stop oxidative stress. And I could wear you out, as I have on many occasions, with all the things that copper does. And one of my students from down under finally said, Morley, could you do us a favor? I said, what's that? She said, could you just identify the 5 or 6 enzymes that don't require copper? And we'll memorize that. And it seems like everything else requires copper. I said, I can do that. And that's foreign thinking, because most people are convinced that they're anemic and vitamin D deficient. And now they're being trained to be terrified of retinol and get rid of that copper. It's a poison. You're toxic. You're copper toxic. And people have not learned what happened last year. They don't know about the math of 1984. So you take 1984 and you subtract the publication date of 1948, you get 36. So when you take 36 and you add it to 1984, you get to the year 2020. And so last year gave us perfect 2020 vision about what's really going on. And if folks aren't familiar with 1984, it would be a really good read. It only takes a weekend. It only takes a couple of days to read it. It's very beautifully laid out, but it's a very graphic reminder of what life could be like under extreme circumstances. And so it's important for people to know that we've been had, and we're seeing the evidence of that now. We're beginning to see the truth begin to trickle out, and we're just at the beginning of that process. And we don't need to get into the politics of it. We need to really ground ourselves in the integrity and the truth of it. And what I work overtime to do is find stellar articles like these that I know have scientific rigor and integrity. And I think it's rare. Well, yeah, but I think it's time for people to ground their thinking in the truth. And what I'm really seeking to do is give people better information so they can make better decisions. Isn't that why we're here? To make better decisions so we can ease some of the stress in our day. And what's really important to deal with stress is energy. We've got to be able to make more energy. And it all comes back full circle to needing bioavailable copper to regulate the iron, to regulate the oxygen, so we can, in fact, make more ATP. That's it.
That's brilliant. It's awesome.
Does that make sense?
It makes great sense to me, and it stimulates more questions as well. I'm not sure whether feedback is coming from, but nonetheless, I have to head to the office for patients. So thank you so much for your time today, Morley.
Absolutely.
Morley's program is rcp123.org. You can find his group there. He's also founder and developer of the Magnesium Advocacy Group. He did mention another website or a Facebook group that I'm going to look into, which is taking the deep dive into
Corticosteroid
hormone D group.
And that's for those who really want to take a serious dive into the deep truth of hormone D. It's very different than what you've been trained to believe on the pablum-based internet sites.
Right. Okay.
All right.
Awesome, brother. Thanks so much.
You bet. Always good to spend time with you. Thanks for the chance.
You bet, brother. We'll connect soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Okay, my fellow health warriors, it's time to head over to iTunes, franklyspeakingdrwade.com. There, you can rate, review, and subscribe, as well as share, so more of our brothers and sisters can grow to realize their voice and their health freedom. Speaking up means you matter, so get on it. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements or views expressed are not medical advice and are not meant to replace the advice of your medical doctor. This podcast, including Dr. Wade Anderson and his guests, disclaim responsibility for any adverse effects you may experience from the specific use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse and accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about the guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for such services or products. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical condition, consult your licensed physician.